message. Recording in progress. If you'd like to direct message Steph your email, then she's going to make sure that you are first on the list to get a copy of that. Housekeeping, I think that's it. Yeah. So, oh yeah, just a reminder, tonight's event, like all of our events, is run by the Shelf Help Code of Conduct, which is confidentiality, kindness, and no judgment. So ask away, and any questions, ask away. Georgie is here to answer them. I'm here to answer them. And kindness, I think, very important tonight. We're talking about self-kindness, self-compassion, and how these kind of, I suppose, softer skills that historically would maybe be more a female skill, they're the kind of things that are going to help us do better in business and in life. So a little bit about Georgie Dickins, coach and advisor to stratospheric leaders. She supports some of the world's most successful people in getting to and staying at the top of their game. She's a founder and CEO of Women in Leadership Global, an international speaker and author, like I said, and her new book, Women in Leadership, is 500 Lessons to Our Younger Selves. That's out in May. So let us know if you want to get a copy of that and message Steph in the box. So Georgie, congratulations on the new book. I can't wait to dive into this with you and also to find out what you think about self-compassion and why it is an important leadership skill.
Thank you. And can I say, you can do my bio anytime, I have to say. I'm feeling great listening to you talk about me. Yeah, and the book, yeah, as we said, it's out in May. It's 500 Lessons to Our Younger Selves. And the interesting thing about Lessons to Our Younger Selves is, with the prism of hindsight, it's easy to reflect on how we would do things differently. And so what I wanted to do with, as you mentioned, I run a Women in Leadership network, and I wanted to capture the lessons, learnings, anecdotes, sound bites that we've learned along the way that we'd want to, again, give back to the next generation. And we teach what we most need to learn. So any of these lessons, I think, would be applicable to each of us at different times. And it, again, I think writing a book it's like, I've never given birth to quads, but there is a long process there, but I'm delighted to share it with the world now.
Yeah, brilliant. It really is a process, isn't it? And then once it's out there, it's the kind of, yeah, just waiting for the feedback. And like you said to me before we came online, you can't wait to get it in the hands of people that really need it and want it. So quite often the first question that I ask people on these events is, what word would describe your relationship with yourself? Because we're a lot about kind of improving that. But I thought your question might instead be, what would your lesson be to your younger self?
Yeah. And it's interesting because you asked me that question. I'm like, wow, there are so many lessons that I would want my younger self to know. I am someone who worries. I overthink on everything. Like, genuinely, my husband's like, just compartmentalize. And I'm like, I don't know how to do that. So I think it would be worry less, know what good enough looks like. Because if I could calculate the amount of hours I've spent overthinking, believing my own self-talk as if it were true, honestly, it's not even days. I mean, we're talking years. And so I think actually, if I just got better at managing my inner dialogue back in my 20s, I could, well, not even 20s, I think let's go back in my, even earlier than that, I could have saved myself a lot of, I was my biggest naysayer for many, many years.
And we're going to talk about that tonight, aren't we? The inner critic, and about not getting rid of it, because that we all know that's not going to happen. That doesn't happen for a lot of us, but making friends with it and taking back the power in that relationship.
100%. No, my experience and what I observe in my coaching work is that I assumed, you look at people who are at the top of their, leaders at the top of organizations, and you see them and they look swan-like, calm, collected, graceful. And you can assume that, again, there is no self-doubt there. And I would tell you this, it's omnipresent. And they've just recognized that self-doubt is part of the journey, but they've kind of put it into the past. It's the passenger, it's not the pilot. So they have a toolkit in order to, as you said, to make it a friend, not a foe, because it's trying to serve us. And so I think it's, again, if you have a heartbeat, then you will experience that at some point in your life.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Even the most successful people still experience this. I heard a saying the other day, and it said, next level, new devil. And it's just like, so, and I thought, yeah, I recognize that so much, because you think, once I do this, like, lean into it, feel the fear, do it anyway, all that jazz. And then it's like, oh yeah, now there's something else to contend with. So tonight you're going to talk us through 2 different exercises, one specifically about the inner critic, and then also we're going to be looking at the women's villain era. And I love that. I know you're a Marvel fan, so is that where that comes from?
That was recently on TikTok, which, again, a client introduced me to, but then my son subsequently have. So yeah, I think when we were discussing how can we bring some real substance and impact to this session, it was looking at those two pillars. And I think I just wanted to share a little bit about the genesis of the book, if that's okay, because just to circle back to the fact, I think it's very easy to compare our inner with everyone else's outer. And that comparing and contrasting is really healthy if it's constructive, but often it's in that useless rumination, which kind of feeds into that inner critic. But I think when I was in the industry, I worked in the corporate space for 20 years. There were so many insecurities, fears, doubts that I experienced on a daily basis. I mean, we're not even talking like every so often. It was the chronic people pleasing. You know, daily I would pretzel myself into what others needed me to be. I would over yes, and I would say yes to everything that was asked of me because I had the fear of missing out. I didn't want to be seen as irrelevant. And Susie Redding, who I know is a friend to both of us, I remember like now in my 40s, you know, one of her sayings is like, don't mistake your capability for your capability for your capacity. So it was the chronic people pleasing. It was the moment self-doubt where I worked in banking, and I didn't come from a Cambridge or an Oxbridge degree. And I thought everyone in the room thought I was a fraud. I thought everyone in the room thought I was an outsider. And again, if we think about self-talk like that, everyone is an absolute. And you know, that's, I mean, maybe there were one or two people that questioned my ability, but certainly not everyone. But I believe that story as if it were true. And I think a single thought, whether it's positive or negative, it becomes a powerhouse when you believe it. And I think that self-doubt, when we believe those thoughts, it influences our emotions, it influences our behaviors. And I know when I used to have to present, I would look around the room and I would identify the one person I thought was questioning me, one person who I believed was thinking, God, why the hell is she on the stage? And rather than leverage the believers, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to convince that one person that I do deserve to be up here. And it's interesting how we can go down this rabbit hole. And it's such an energy suck. And again, you asked the question, like, what do I wish I wish I'd have caught myself. Because again, I think as human beings, we all have emotional triggers where an event, a person, a situation will trigger us. And it's easy to go into that tumble dryer of emotion and that tumble dryer of thoughts, that comparisonitis, you know, comparing and contrasting ourselves with others. And I think often the biggest naysayer is the 6 inches. It's the, you know, between our ears, our minds they're great Oscar-winning story writers. And so that self-doubt, that again, and because of the pretzeling myself, I think I can safely say I was in chronic overwhelm because I wanted to prove to everyone I could do it all. And I'm again, an overachieving perfectionist or recovering overachieving perfectionist. And I said, what I recognized in my coaching and advisory work is I was never alone. I was never an outsider. People just got really good at keeping the mask firmly wedded on. But I compared what I knew to be my thoughts and feelings with how I assumed other people were. And it was like apples and pears. It wasn't a fair comparison. And so I think the point here that I just wanted to land is we've got to be really careful how we compare ourselves, you know, that talk, because I promise you this, you know, people that I coach would appear so perfect in so many ways, yet it's behind closed doors, behind the curtains. They've just been intentional and disciplined about recognizing how they need to take agency for their thoughts and their thinking. Again, so they are in the driving seat. They're not that, you know, that passenger that I referred to earlier. So they've got a map, they've got a toolkit that they tap into as and when they need to.
Yeah, I think it's so useful to hear that other people feel the same. I mean, loads of people in the chat are like, relatable, that's relatable, because it really is. And so one of the components of self-compassion that we're learning about in the book is that kind of common humanity and that interconnectedness, that like people, we all feel like this, and that actually is really empowering. Whereas to what you were speaking earlier, that negative thought can then become a powerhouse, or the positive thought can become a powerhouse, but the negative thoughts can be just paralyzing, can't they?
They can be. And I think it's not that we want to silence our thinking, but it's don't get lost in your thoughts. I think sometimes we can just dive in and actually just observe them. Like, what's it trying to tell us? You know, when the inner critic, you know, and I shared with you, Tony, there's a difference. You know, one of my distinctions, you know, when I'm discerning between, do I listen to this, is this situation I'm in, is it scary or dangerous? If I am climbing up, you know, Mount Everest without any safety equipment, and my inner critic is saying, I really don't think you should do this. Like, you know, it's like, are you sure you're well equipped for this? In that moment, I should listen to it, because it is trying to keep me safe. You know, it's trying to do a good job. And if I give it too much credence, if I give it too much attention, then it can be, you know, it can prevent me, you know, if an opportunity is scary, I want to put myself forward for a job opportunity. I want to do a skydive. I want to speak up at a team meeting. That might be scary because, again, we're outside our comfort zone, but that's not dangerous. So I think this is where we, you know, it's questioning the inner critic, being curious, like, what is it, what's the message behind it? Because there is a message if we exercise some curiosity. And I think often it's that lack of curiosity. It comes in and we just lean into it. We embrace it. And actually it's like, no, actually, what is the message behind it? Because I said, sometimes it merits listening to it. But it's I suppose giving thought to how much power am I giving it to? Because sometimes we allow it to take the reins and really to dial up and have a loud voice that can become paralyzing.
Sure. And in the lessons, so is it 100 lessons?
500.
500 lessons.
500 lessons.
But there are some real common themes, aren't there?
Yeah, and this inner critic and this self-compassion, and something I say to my clients is words make worlds. You know, they do. If we think of politicians, you know, their choice of language is really important. And I think if any of us was to take a transcription, you know, to transcribe, you know, the thoughts that we can say, you know, where I'm too passive, I'm too aggressive, I'm too loud, I'm too quiet. Like, if we could actually, and actually, to be fair, that sounds quite nice. I think our negative self-talk could be far harsher than that. If we were to actually transcribe it, and then we really had mirror up to be like, okay, this is how I speak to myself. We are meanies. We are the worst. You would never speak to your child. You'd never speak to a colleague. You'd never speak to someone you care about in the same way. And if we think about ourselves, like the relationship with ourselves, that is the most important relationship we can have. That relationship, you know, if we want to be a good parent, if we want to be a good friend, if we want to be a good leader of people, you know, of others, you know, we've got that self-leadership and that self-compassion kind of has to be there. And yeah, I think we can be often the biggest culprits of not being kind to ourselves. And I think, again, if we're a leader of people, or if we're parents, you know, or friends, you know, what is that modeling to others? Because it's a modeling. And I think when that self-talk, I always think of catch it, check it, change it, because the catch it is, okay, the inner critic has just said, for example, I've stumbled over my words, therefore everyone is just thinking, oh my God, like, what's she doing? That I can catch it. So that's, you know, catch it. And then the check it. How true is that? Like, how true is that? Like, what is the data or evidence to support that everyone thinks that I don't know what I'm talking about? And then the change it. We are always in choice. I think, again, I keep going back to that pilot passenger. We are always in choice with our thoughts. You know, we can determine the mindset that we want to adopt. But I think often when we're tired, we're busy, it takes effort. And it's like we don't have those resources to dedicate to it. Yet again, you just got to be disciplined. And it's one of those things, the more, it's like a muscle, the more you exercise the catch it, check it, change it. How true is this? You know, how do I know for sure that it's true? And the other thing with the check it, I would also in those situations be, we're not always the most compassionate with ourselves. And even when we're trying to be kind to ourselves, there's still some way to go. And I think it's then knowing, like, who are your tribe, who are your posse, who can help you see yourself in the way that others see you, who can be that compassionate friend that can help you see things from a different perspective, because we can't always see it ourselves. So therefore, it's, again, knowing, and I'm sure, you know, with your self-help group, there's a tribe, there's a posse, and we can't underestimate the value of those relationships. So when the fraud squad comes to town, we have our trusted outlet who can who can, you know, take us, kind of put us on the balcony to look at things more holistically rather than, you know, being in the weeds.
Yeah, and that's why it is important to share, isn't it? To share the, like you when you said if somebody transcribed what was going on in your head, I was just thinking I'd be mortified, I'm sure, as would probably lots of people, because yeah, I know, I mean, I'm getting better at catching it. And I even kind of like have a laugh about it sometimes, you know, if I'm just like, what an idiot, you know, just like you say, the language, it's like, it's so powerful. And I know this and I teach it and I'm reading about it all the time. And I still, sometimes it still kind of runs away with me, obviously. I loved your definition of self-compassion today in the video that I made you, I forced you to record for me, which
there's my inner critic. I don't do videos. I'm like, I can't do this. Like everyone, I did it first take and I'm like, you know what? It's going to be good enough, because if I hadn't done it on the first take, you'd have had like take 50. So that, again, there was like me trying to be, just do it. It's good enough. And otherwise, yeah, I'd have been critical of the way my camera was, the language I used, the fact I stumbled. Like, I'm like, you know what? Good enough. Good enough. Yeah. And actually that felt good. That felt good, because then I reclaimed some time by not doing 50 takes.
Totally. It's like all the energy that goes into like it's getting something perfect. It's perfectionism. So a few people have talked about today when we've been sharing on Instagram, talking about self-compassion and this kind of stuff. And you said self-compassion is the antidote to self-doubt, which is brilliant. So it's kind of, so when that self-doubt is creeping in, it's the self-kindness, it's the mindfulness, isn't it? It's being in the moment and kind of being aware of what's actually happening rather than running into the future or into the past.
Yeah, because and it's interesting, the words I just wrote down there were I am. You know, what follows the words I am are some of the most powerful or the most influential words you can use. So let's, you know, I am, again, before I do a lot of events, I'm like, right, I am tenacious, I'm confident, or because otherwise I can be, I am underprepared, I am, you know, and what follows that? We're labeling ourselves, and that is informing our neural pathways, it's informing how we feel. So I think when we're doing affirmations, you know, I am the ... there are some brilliant exercises, again, you know, after today, you know, I am to write down the 20 things I am, you know. I often be like, I'm a really bad parent because I haven't made a cricket match. And then I'll evidence that, because I'll be like, okay, well, Alfred said, like on the 7th of January, I made his hockey match, but I missed his goal. And like that, they're the things I hold on to, rather than all the evidence to refute that all the things that I have been to. So I am, and again, how I said, words make worlds, how we talk to ourselves matters. And the self-compassion, we are naturally have that negativity bias. So, you know, I am a bad parent. It's something I regularly say, and I have to catch it. I'm like, no, I'm a freaking good parent. I'm doing the best I can with the tools that I have, because I want to be a perfect parent. And if we think about perfection, like, what does that even mean? Like, that becomes the enemy of so many things, because we are striving always, because I don't know what, again, I'd be curious with the call, like, we can get to our summit and then we're nexting, you know, the next big audacious goal. We're not being like, well done me, you know, I've achieved this amazing success. And we look back down the mountain to be like, okay, what were all the waypoints? What were all the markers along the way? Because reaching a summit, you know, getting a new role, being a parent, none of this happens by chance. Yet we're often in the world of nexting. When, to your point a minute ago, we're not in that present moment. We're thinking about what next, rather than, because self-compassion is also about, you know what, let's say something great's happened, diagnosing, like, you know, unpacking, you know, what actually led to that success, because there'll be many conversations, many different events that happen that lead to that success, and we can often just overlook it, or it's a sweeping thing, and actually unpack it and own it, because the more we own it and percolate on it, we infuse it into our bodies, and it shows up in our energy, it shows up in our confidence, and it shows up in how people experience us.
Totally. And talking about being a parent, Alice shared in the chat, talking about being conscious, like modeling, being, when you have children, then it kind of almost makes you hyper aware of what they're taking in when you're speaking to yourself, kind of in the car, or, you know, if you're rushing and being late and all that kind of stuff. So that maybe is kind of maybe quite a nice check sometimes.
Yeah, if you really, again, it'd be really interesting if, you know, you did record your language. Often language can be really catastrophic. Like, you know, this meeting's killing me, or whatever. Like, again, killing me, like, really, is it? You know, when we really spotlight language, I said, Our language says a lot about our inner system and about how we're feeling. And I think, again, it informs our emotions, our being. And yet we're so busy, we're so frenetic and, go in that constant throughput of life. I don't think often we're like, okay, what is the language that I'm using? Because you know what? It really, it matters. So I really, just want a reminder that, words make worlds. I mean, they really do. And yet we don't probably give enough thought to how are we talking about ourselves and how are we talking to ourselves?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, love it all. I know everyone's relating heavily to a lot of this. Shall we start talking about inner critic then?
Yeah, can I show a quick slide, because I'm going to ask we're going to go to an exercise, but there's a really lovely statue, a sculptor called Jim Rennett. It's in the States, and for me it really encapsulates the inner critic. So I wanted to share it, and any of these slides that I share, I'm happy to send over to Tony. Hold on, I'm just going to go back so I don't want you to see it all just yet. Okay, so this is Jim Rennett, this beautiful sculpture, which is, again, it's huge. It's like, I don't know, 7 or 8 feet. But he says the smallest version of any, well, again, he says a highly accomplished leader, but let's say a human being can have the loudest voice. So that little person on his hand, he's only little, but it can be amplified and loud, and it can take center stage. And it may say, you're too ambitious, you're too fast, you're too slow, you're unrealistic. And it isn't necessary for the mind to be quiet, because look, we have so many ideas and thoughts percolating all the time, but not to listen to these thoughts as if they were true. And just to go back, as I said before, a single thought, whether it's positive or negative, becomes a powerhouse when we believe it. But this is another way. I did the catch it, check it, change it. But Byron Katie, has some great questions, because let's say I'm going for a promotion and I'm like, do you know what? God, I probably look like I'm too ambitious. Is it true? Like, that's a binary, yes or no. There's no like gray area, ambiguity. Is it true? Yes or no? Arthur, okay, you can go past. You can open that. Yes, that's a football. Sorry, my son is like in my husband's office opening his. Don't worry about interrupting. Thank you. Is it true? Yes or no? Then can I absolutely know that it's true? What is the evidence to support or refute what I think? What is the evidence to support the fact that I'm too ambitious, or actually refute it? Like, who said that? Like, is this just, is this my own inner dialogue, or is this someone else? How do I react, and what happens when I believe that thought? Because when you really start unpacking it, how do I respond? Maybe I feel worse. Maybe I then feel a bit deflated. Maybe I think, you know what? No, I really am. I'm not ready. Who or what would I be without that thought? And I think our thinking is such a powerful, it's so powerful. So I think it's the catch it, check it, change it. And to me, as I said, Byron Katie has some great ways of how to question this, because when we change the questions, change the questions we ask ourselves, we change the experience. Change the questions you ask yourself, you change the experience. And I'm going to just say here, it's the power in the pause, because we're human beings, we will be emotionally triggered. These questions won't happen by chance. There's power in the pause, where you insert yourself in to take control before you allow your thoughts to run away with themselves. So, something happens, you think you're too ambitious, power in the pause. Let me slow down. Don't let yourself go into an emotional reaction, but instead it's a considered response, which are these 4 questions here. So I'll share that with Tony afterwards, but I just thought that was I think it's a really lovely way of visual. I think some people are visual, and it's a great visual.
And Georgie, would you use this with regards to a thought that's kind of bringing you like emotional pain, or that you just feel is like a blocker, or that's just something that you're just very aware is maybe just is with you all the time?
Yeah, it's with you all the time. Or suddenly, we can all be triggered where suddenly we're caught off guard. We bump into our leader in the elevator, and we think we've just made a complete fool of ourselves. Well, is it true? So I think there's things that are with us all the time, and then there are things that are happening real time. And the real-time things, you know, power in the pause, you know, ask yourself the questions. I said you change the questions, you change your experience.
Yeah.
And the other piece here before we go to the exercise is give your inner critic a name. You know, my friend Mandy Leto, she shared this with me many years ago, and hers is Judgy Janet. So whenever, because look, our inner critic is part of us, but it's not who we are. Like, you know, it's a sub-personality part. So when you hear it, you might be, it's Judgy Janet speaking, or it's uninvited Ursula, or it's Jackass Jerry. You know, give it a name. So when you hear it, it's like, okay, what is Jackass Jerry trying to tell me? And, you know, so therefore we're connected to it, but it's not fully who we are. So that's the other thing that I would share.
I'd love to see anybody's names. I think some people have these already. I've seen them once or twice. And if you don't have them one already, then maybe tonight is the night that we christen that inner critic.
Christen the inner critic. Yeah, it's a powerful tool, a very, very powerful tool. The same way we want to be compassionate, give yourselves an alter ego. You know, Beyonce had Sasha Fierce, Adele had one, because it allowed them to embody the qualities and behaviors that they didn't feel they could access as Beyonce. But as Sasha Fierce, she's like, I'm confident, I'm a badass, I can own this stage with Prince. So it's also the other way, you know, those that embody things that we qualities, confidence, compassion, you know, have an alter ego. So mine is well, again, I borrowed this off Mandy. So J-Lo, I think, is amazing. So I go G-Lo. So, you know, what, because she's sassy, she's confident, and so, you know, what would G-Lo do in this situation?
Yes, love it.
Okay, so I know we wanted to ask a question, and I think for you and Tony, you tell me how long people should take to reflect on this, and I could put it in the chat, but it's, you know, which of your assumptions about yourself would your good friends challenge? So again, or Steph, you know, which of your assumptions about yourself would your good friends challenge? So first of all, you need to think about, you know, what is an assumption? Because let's be clear, assumption isn't fact. It's just something I believe to be true with maybe no evidence. So which of your assumptions would your good friends challenge? And how would you describe yourself if you were being as kind to yourself as you are to kind of your friends? So those two questions, I think, will catalyze the thinking to be like, okay, where am I telling myself stories? And actually, if I was being kind to myself, which I can be that person, how would I describe myself?
Yeah, I think everyone take a minute or two to just kind of to think on the answers of those. And if you're feeling brave and want to share in the chat, then you can, but you don't need to. It's usually easier to share the it's usually probably easier to share the first one, isn't it? Kind of the assumptions about yourself. Because I've talked about this before. I did an event with Shuri Rizadi, who's all about self-compassion and self-kindness. And I asked everyone in the room, I was like, write a list of things you love about yourself and share it with the group. And she was like, no one's going to do that, just so you know. In a group setting, we're much better at sharing what we don't like about ourselves. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, well, that's just like, that makes sense. But
you know what, and you're 100% right. And I think we need to get good about talking about ourselves, because
I agree.
If we think of the world of work, how can we expect leaders to talk about us positively and favorably if we can't do it for ourselves?
Yeah.
So again, all good leadership starts with self-leadership, you know, so and look, I think, again, I said before about this muscle exercising, I think practice talking about yourself in the mirror, you know, and again, because the more that we practice, it becomes second nature. It just kind of rolls off the tongue. You know, what do you want to be known for? You know, it's a strategic thinker, a problem solver, great with relationships, you know, tenacious, ambitious. Like, I am ambitious, I am tenacious, like, own it and fully own it. Because I think, you know, if you want to be known for certain things and these qualities, then you've got to be able to talk about, you know, it's again, there's some practice about, you know, and it takes practice, because again, we want to shy away, but to practice speaking about ourselves.
Yeah, sure. So what are the two questions again, Sheila?
What assumptions about yourself would your good friends challenge? And how would you describe yourself if you were being as kind to yourself and generous as you are to your friends?
Yeah. When I went on a business retreat recently, one of the questions for the application was, what 3 words would your best friend use to describe you? Oh. So I asked some of my friends. I was like, oh, well, I'm just going to ask them. And they all came back with different things, but it was so nice to read. It was just
I love
like
that.
just 3 words, and it was just like, just felt like it's like a nice thing, isn't it?
But that's giving you a dose of good stuff like dopamine, endorphins, and and it's about you owning it. I think often when we think of compliments or positive feedback like that, we can treat it like Teflon. It's like, whereas if someone said, Tony, you're aggressive, I mean, you'd own that, and that would become like, Velcro it on. And I think it's often those types of situations, we can not take time to process it. And compliments are a gift. I mean, they really are a gift. And as such, I know when I've been given compliments before, someone might say that was a great presentation. I'm like, oh, it didn't take me that long to prepare it. Or again, rather be like, and actually it really did. And I think, but then you'd never, if I came to your birthday party and I brought you a gift wrapped in a bow and I'd spent ages like, wrapping it beautifully, and you gave it back to me, I'd be like, oh, that's really rude. And it's the same with compliments. I think when we don't actually say thank you, but we try and like, bat it back, actually that's, it's not polite.
Yeah. And I screenshot those things, and it's a good thing to kind of reflect on when the inner critic is there, or when you're kind of when you're doubting yourself.
I think when the fraud squad comes to town, and it will, I think that's when we're so then emotionally heightened, we can't always access that logical, wise, objective part of us, which is then where, if you have got some of those screenshots, it's a good reminder.
Yeah. And so where do you think, so we talk about assumptions, things that aren't facts, so things that we've decided about ourselves, and where do they come from? They're just stories that we've just kind of picked up along the way and kind of.
Well, again, I suppose it's so much of this will come from childhood, parents, teachers. Like, again, I look back at childhood, and I think my parents boxed me as not being the sporty one. Like, I don't know if that's true, but but that's certainly a story I lived through my that I've lived. So I think it can be parents, it can be teachers, people who have been in our lives, who we've listened to, but some of it's subconscious, we're not even aware. There may be a teacher at school who said one thing, and we forgot the 99 things they said that were amazing, but we remembered the one time that they said, you're actually, this reminds me of one of my clients. She used to do ballet dancing classes, and when she must have only been 7, and the teacher held her hand when they were in a circle and said, God, your hands are really sweaty. So she said, she hates shaking hands with clients because she's like, because my hands are really sweaty. And that would something that a teacher would have said, just a very sweeping statement, because maybe she was warm, but that has stayed with her as something that she's carried around with her, and as an insecurity she's had. So I think, hence, again, we'll never always know where the beliefs come from, but again, it's question it, go to the root. Don't deal with the headline, look at the root.
Yeah, sure. Emma's shared, which I love, my friends would challenge me saying I'm not that bright, and they would say I'm sharp and a quick thinker. I would say I'm not that thoughtful, and others would say I always think of others. It's so nice to see it, and I think we love to see other people share things like that, don't we? So it's that lovely, it's the vulnerability, isn't it? And like we always go back to that kind of Brené Brown quote, that it's like, it's the last thing that I want to see, I want you to see in me, but the first thing I want to see in you, because that's how we connect, and that's how we feel like we know each other.
100%. And it's and I think often, put ourselves in the shoes of others. When we look at, if we put ourselves in the shoes of our friends, we can see ourselves differently. And I think then it's, our friends love us dearly because of who we are. We have bought them. They're there in our world because they want to be there. And I think actually, really giving power to how they see us and owning that. But again, it's easy to go with the negative spiral. So I think, again, to the point, it's discipline, it's intentionality to own those positive comments and to bathe in them, lather them all over us, to really fully own and embody them.
Yeah, I love. Katie, I like your comment. My friend, what did you say? Someone recently described me as serious, and I took it to heart, and now I'm trying to prove that I'm in fact fun. But actually that can be, you can own that, and serious could mean focused, ambitious. Like I think one of my friends said that I was reliable, and I was like, well, that's boring. But I thought, no, actually in a quality of a friend, that's really important.
Yeah. And different people have different values. You know, your friend, reliability might be one of their key determining factors in terms of what it means to be a good friend. And the word serious, again, you know, I think you said Katie will have her own connotations and interpretations of what serious means. But for, you know, I would then be like, you know, the TED questions are a really good way of accessing more information. Tell me, explain, describe. So I'd be like, you know, let's say Katie's friend is called Hannah. Hannah, tell me more about that. I'd love to know how the word serious, you know, tell me more about that. So I think sometimes we can take things as a headline, you know, you are serious, actually understand what's behind that, because maybe that is 100% a compliment, but she's received that in not the way that it was intended.
So then it goes back to the, is it true? That kind of, like you say, the questioning about, questioning, isn't it? And awareness the whole time.
Yeah, 100%. Is it true? And again, I said, seek feedback, because often we can be in our own head, and actually sometimes it's important to hear from others, and because they can offer a different perspective, because we're often narrow, where it just will widen the aperture of like how we're seeing something if we solicit more information.
Yeah. And do you have any advice on how to release like the need to be perfect? We've already talked a little bit about, but is there any advice on how to not basically?
Yeah, no, look, it's something I struggle with personally, knowing what good enough looks like. I have people around me who I over prepare, I overextend myself. So I have requested people around me to flag when enough's enough, you know, in terms of and like when I'm entering the place of diminishing returns, because it's my boundaries and things, and we're going to come on to the women's villain era. My boundaries are like elastic, and so I'm getting better, but it's hard. There's a natural, you know, I think of sometimes there are unhelpful habits or behaviors. They're like a pair of old slippers that are worn, that there are holes in the bottom, so then they're not really functioning, but it's easy, and it's better the devil you know. And actually to try, you know, to develop new habits and mindsets and behaviors takes time. And I know I have my own coach as well, because I need people around me as sounding boards, truth tellers, challengers, because when I live in here, I can do a good job of catching it, but I also need support from my kind of posse as well.
Yeah. And you said it's easy, but actually long term, it's not really, is it? It's much easier not to be perfect.
No, I think, and the thing is, perfect is, it means it's subjective. Your idea of perfect, you know, let's say we're baking a cake, you know, yours might be perfect, the fact that it, you know, it rose, and you know, and mine might, you know, we can have completely different versions of perfect. Is completely subjective. And so like, what is the barometer we're measuring ourselves against? So I think it's really important to recognize, you know, what is that barometer? And sometimes we can do a good job of it ourselves. And other times, again, it's having people around us who know us, who are more objective, who can bring a different lens to the situation.
Yeah, sure. And then this brings us back to the self-compassion, doesn't it, as well? It's kind of it's having self-compassion around everything doesn't need to be exactly right all the time. What was that quote that you shared before from Susie Redding? Before we're going to move on quick soon to the villain era, about capability and capacity.
Yeah, so it's two that Susie does a lot of work with my clients because she's fabulous. And she's, you know, three things that I'm going to share. She says, your energetic bankruptcy serves no one. You being replenished serves everyone. I'm like, okay, yeah, good point. Hadn't thought about that. Don't confuse your capability for your capacity. You know, just because you can do something doesn't mean you've necessarily got the bandwidth to be able to do it.
Yeah. And
the other piece she shared, which really landed for me, she said, it takes more time to maintain your health than to reclaim it. You know, we're often which will come to what we're talking about, boundaries. You know, I don't think we necessarily recognize the repercussion, the consequences of people pleasing, you know, pretzeling ourselves, you know, the over yesing. And she has certainly helped me recognize the consequences of not being bold, of not having overt boundaries, of them not being visible, because ultimately in the end, you know, we're the ones that suffer.
Yeah, totally. You mentioned your boundaries are like elastic, but I can imagine that you're getting much better.
Yeah, much better. Because the thing is, look, when I was in the corporate space, I didn't actually, I had boundaries, well, but loose ones, to be fair, but I never told anyone what my boundaries were. You know, the fact, like, you know, I don't want to be contacted after 7 p.m. I don't want to be traveling more than 3 days a week. I don't want to be someone contact me on a Sunday afternoon. Like, they were boundaries, but I never told anyone they were my boundaries. And so, but I would then get frustrated and resentful for people breaching my boundaries, but they didn't actually know that those boundaries existed. So I think my frustration with my boundaries was not actually in other people. It was more in myself, because and if I did put a boundary in place, I would see it as negotiable. You know, let's say someone sends me an email at 9 o'clock and I want to shut off all kind of devices at 9. I'll be like, well, it's only sleep. You know, if I go to bed an hour later, like, that's fine. So I'd negotiate my own time to please other people. So it's this selfish versus selfless. I allowed others to be selfless and selfish. So I would be selfless. And I remember Abraham Hicks, who I I remember her saying the screwy reasoning going on where you're forever in this world of being selfless and other people are being selfish. It kind of, it's this asymmetric exchange where, you know, you're not meeting peer-to-peer, human to human. There's a, you know, you're creating a dependency on you because you're always prepared to say yes. And, you know, and sometimes that's important and it's necessary, but I think it's when it gets into a habit and a behavior that is preventing you from, you know, yes is a responsibility and it has a magnitude of commitment. And I think, you know, let's say someone's asked you to do something today, that needs to be delivered in 3 weeks' time. It's easy to say yes now on the spot, actually, without thinking about what does this actually mean? You know, how much time do I need to do this? And have I got the capacity? Which speaks to the power in the pause. You know, when someone is asking you to do something, like, you know, how can it be more of a me first decision? Like, do I actually want to do this? Am I the right person to do it? Because we can, not every time, but we can say no, or look, I've got 30 minutes. Tell me what I can get done in 30 minutes. Or look, I'll come back to you by the end of the week. I mean, we can start just inserting more boundaries that, again, give us more agency and authority. I think it's just very easy to overcommit without really recognizing what that means.
Yeah, I think Sarah Knight shares in a few of her books ways to actually say no without saying no for people who aren't very good at it, which is because she always talks about how energy, time and money are finite resources, and we need to remember that, because at the time it's easy to say, yeah, cool, I'll book that holiday, you know, I'll come on that hen do, I'll do that meeting for you, I'll do this, I'll do that. And she's actually like, there's a load of ways that you can say, basically, I'll get back to you, and give yourself that kind of breather to then go back and say no.
Yeah, and I think it's even like social engagements. Let's say someone says to you, you know, I'd love to catch up a week on Saturday. And you may say that, you know, and that seems quite a long way off. So it's like, yeah, of course. But I think someone's like, would I say yes? You know, when someone's asking you, like, do you want to go out for dinner a week on Saturday? Putting yourself in your, would I say yes if I was being asked on the day? And if it's no, well, then I think it's you know, it's again, putting up our boundaries, and we don't have to give excuses. I think that's often when we don't want to do something, we'll give loads of reasons, like, I can't possibly do this for X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
And it creates space for negotiation. And so, you know, I think often, you know, no is a sentence, and we don't need to justify, and we do. And I think often with situations, I use the acronym JOMO, the joy of missing out. You know, we think about FOMO, the you know, fear of missing out. What about joy? Like that, you know, to your point, time, you know, money, you know, these valuable resources, we have access to more of that if we're saying no to things.
Yeah, absolutely. No is a complete sentence, everyone. I need to remember that as well. I need to remember that too. Okay, let's talk about our villain era then. Is this our villain era as in like each of us, or like a general women's villain era?
Well, they call it the women's villain era, and it was recently talked about on TikTok, and it really speaks to what we've just been talking about. And it said that, and look, it talks about women, but I think broadly speaking, this is humans, you know, the demands on all of us are ratcheting up. And sometimes it can feel like we're being pulled from every four corner. And so what it was talking to is, this is the year where we will be bolder in our boundaries. We will be more, you know, we were the pilot of our lives. We will, you know, we will focus on energy conservation. And we will, you know, this chronic people pleasing, you know, we will get to grips with that and master the tools to, you know, to not look for external validation, but to really tune in and tap in and turn on that self-worth. And it's a really interesting concept. And it's an interesting concept because I read it and I thought, actually, am I observing that with the people that I work with? And yes, I am, in the sense there is heightened awareness around we're doing too much, we're overextending, we're over-yesing. Generally, we're trying to do more with less time. So look, there's an awareness, but do I see the needle moving in terms of actions, behaviors? Because look, there's no change without change. And we can talk about how we need to be bolder in boundaries. We can have a plan in place, but you then got to integrate and apply it. That's when the work really starts. And you know, if you think of going to a personal trainer to, you know, to get a six-pack, you know, they will give you the exercises, they will give you a nutrition plan, but then you've got to do the work between the sessions. And it's the same, you know, when we talk about today, there's tools, you know, it's the active application and, you know, experimentation of them that will then lead to change. And it's not exercising perfectionism, you know, it's all the micro steps that lead to big shifts. So it is, you know, and things won't work perfectly first time, but it's just about putting that one step forward and you know, creating momentum.
So you're talking about, so as like we just talked about boundaries, so it's actually kind of making them known rather than thinking everyone can read your mind. Yeah,
I mean, wouldn't that be great if people could read about? Yeah, it's and being clear on what do you want, what matters to you, what's important to you. Because again, that allows you to discern between your yeses and nos. If someone is asking you to play in their tennis tournament, you know, their charity tennis tournament in a month's time, and you know, but actually getting fit, you know, is you have the gym, so actually tennis isn't really your thing. Well, then that helps you discern between your yeses and nos. So it really links to what we shared right at the beginning, that all good leadership starts with self-leadership and self-awareness. The more aware you are of yourself, what matters, what you care about, what your motivators are, it then helps you when people are asking things of you to, in that power and the pause, like, is this something I really want to commit to? Like, what I say, you know, have I got the capacity? Have I, you know, and so I think self-awareness is really critical there. And buy yourself some time. To your point, you don't need to make, well, occasionally you will, but not always do you need to make a decision in the moment. So it's that difference between a reaction versus a response.
Yeah, sure. Are there any prompts that you wanted to share with regards to this concept?
Well, there's a couple of I wanted to share a couple of things actually with this women's villain era. Hold on, why can't I? 1 second. Bear with me. This is where my technology. Okay, so I wanted to give people a little bit of a framework around how and there's two things actually that I want to share, which is this one, which is about being the pilot of your career. And actually, let's be clear, pilot of career and life. And these are questions that I think when you give thought to what you care about and what matters to you. And when you start getting a sense of what you care about and what matters, what your drivers are, then if you look at your diary, and this is your social and your personal time, does the amount of attention you're giving to something match its importance? I think that's, and because it starts to help you be like, what are my priorities? What are my big goals this year? And are the things I've prioritized, if you look at your social and your work calendar, have I prioritized the right things? You know, there needs to be an audit regularly, like, and it is about having clarity of your goals and then knowing what your goals are. Have I prioritized the right things? And then when you look at that allocation, am I moving towards my goals or away from them? And this is a reflective, and, you know, this should be done periodically every quarter, because goals change. And I think it's important to be agile and, you know, be able to exercise that course correction if you need. And then the other slide, and I'm aware of time, that I wanted to share with you is, and I'll send these out, but this is, boundaries need to be overt, not covert, visible, not invisible. pay attention to the gains. You know, this is, again, when you start, like, if you assert your boundary, it feels really good. You're taking control, you're getting your time back. So pay attention to that, because that is quite an addictive feeling. Be on your own priority list. If you demonstrate it's okay to trample over your boundaries, others will.
It's you teaching people how to treat you, isn't it? Treat yourself as you want them to treat you. And a lot of that, we talk a lot about scheduling the important stuff. So if going to the gym, if reading, if having a bath, self-care, all this stuff, it's important to you. You put it in the diary and you don't cancel on yourself.
No, and even put a diary note in, bath at 7 p.m. and have like an alert to go off. So again, you're fiercely protecting that time, because if that's important to you, you need to prioritize it. I talked about the joy of missing out. No as a decision, yes as a responsibility. And I think I got that from James Clear, but it's so true. No as a decision, yes, it is a responsibility. And I've put here, avoid social media, not all of it, but I think use it in moderation. And this is boundaries. I can be I'm not a big social media person, but I can go on for a few minutes and I could just be caught up in the spiral, and 15, 20 minutes later. And again, pay attention to the gains. There are zero in some of those situations. So I think it's, again, you've got to take control. Agency sits with each of us. And again, but getting clear on what's important to us, and then asserting ourselves and protecting our space, like fiercely protecting it.
Yeah. Yes, I love that. The author of our self-compassion book, Kristen Neff, her newest book is called Fierce Self-Compassion. And I just love that thought. I mean, that's very like the villain era, isn't it? It's that kind of the idea of being, it's like you're not gonna be moved. So having that belief in yourself and the belief in what's important to you. But like you said, that's about getting clear in the first place what those things are.
Yeah, and I was doing something for a client, and I'm trying to think where it is, but I did a speech bubble earlier, God knows where it's gone. And I put things that, at my overwhelm list, and I'll send a picture so you can share with the group. But I think it's, here it is. But it might be a good exercise and again, a friend shared this with me. I did Georgie's overwhelm list. So sorry, Georgie's perfect system for overwhelm, like looking at my phone just before I go to bed, looking at my phone when I wake up in the night, moving things around in my diary.
Else do these things? And
yeah,
we know we're not alone.
Yeah, so I think, look, and I said, Mandy, a friend that I'm doing some work with, she created this, we all have a perfect system for overwhelm. And again, just put your own system there, like draw attention to how are you creating the conditions you say you don't want.
Yeah, exactly. Because if we say we don't want it, then I think you said to me just before we went live as well, we actually are capable of putting these boundaries in place. It's like it's up to us. We have to take ownership of these things. Guys, just before I close out, let us know if you've got any questions. Drop them in the box. We've got 2 minutes left. We could speed through some if you have any specific questions there. Otherwise, I just wanted to ask, really, what would my final question be to you, Georgie Dickins, tonight? I love that list of overwhelm. That's brilliant. And I love the fact you've made it funny. So like all of this, it's like, sometimes it's like not being so serious about it, isn't it? It's all serious stuff. But if we can make light of it, it just takes the power away from it, doesn't it? And puts us back in that kind of pilot seat.
If you look at like children's activities, for those of us who've got nieces, nephews, children, or even when we were children, a lot of activities, the more fun they are, the more engaging, the more we're motivated to do something. So I think, where you could, like this list, your perfect system for overwhelm, stick it on the fridge, remind yourself again about where you're getting in your own way. And I shared this, there's no change without change. We've all got to do the work to create the conditions that we want.
Yeah, totally. Guys, why don't we close out tonight by sharing in the chat something you do to overwhelm yourself, or the thing you regularly say yes to, either the thing you say yes to or the things you do. Probably social media will be for a few people, to overwhelm yourself, just as a way to share and get it out there, and then I'm sure other people will appreciate it. So Georgie, if you send me those slides, that would be awesome, and I'll share those in the app, guys, for anybody on the same event, so everyone gets to see those in the next day or so. People sharing their phone doom scrolling. And thank you guys for being here. Thank you for being here, getting involved. Thank you, Steph, for chat box queening and tech support. And Georgie, thank you so much for your time and all of that advice and wisdom. Cannot wait to see the book.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Good night, guys. Look after yourself, no overwhelm, and we will see you next Monday for the very first book of the moment meetup all about self-compassion. Bye, guys. Thanks for coming.
Bye.